At her wedding, my daughter asked me to leave. She approached with a faint smile, but her words were quiet yet firm. I should go. As Daniel's family had decided, I didn't fit the image. At first, her words didn't register. It felt surreal, like grasping at fragments of a language I no longer understood. Then, as clarity dawned, she mentioned she didn't want the day ruined by a scene. Without arguing, I nodded and left. That day, I didn't react. But as I have reflected since, the events surrounding that moment play back in my mind like an out-of-tune symphony. What was supposed to be one of the proudest days of my life unraveled into a string of disappointments. Long before the ceremony itself, I once dreamed about walking her down the aisle, a moment filled with silent pride and soft laughter. I imagined the tight grip of her arm, her glowing smile in white, and the emotional exchange we'd share before the music began. Those dreams always carried the memory of her mother, who passed when she was just 6. From then on, I wore both hats, father and mother, navigating late-night homework routines, packing lunches, drying tears during heartbreaks, and working tirelessly to give her a better future. Raising my daughter was never just my responsibility, it became my identity. So when she brought Daniel home for the first time, a nagging instinct told me something wasn't quite right. He wasn't rude outright, yet his smug demeanor grated at me in ways I couldn't shake. He called me sir often, but not with respect, more as if tolerating my presence was a chore. His family's attitude mirrored his in ways that eventually became glaring. When I attended their engagement dinner, Daniel's mother gave me a once-over, lips curling in subtle distaste. My polished shoes and best shirt hadn't mattered to them. I lacked their wealth, their education, their sense of status. Still, I swallowed my discomfort. She loved him, and that was all that mattered, or so I convinced myself. When plans for the wedding began taking shape and his parents favored ideas that excluded me or traditions they dismissed as too outdated, I kept my thoughts to myself. Even when they moved the entire ceremony to a private estate 2 hours away without consulting me, I told myself this was their day. Then came the invitation, my name printed simply as John, with no mention of being the father of the bride. Her late mother received heartfelt recognition in the special tribute section, which she completely deserved, but my role felt erased. Yet I kept showing up. That's what dads do. The morning of her wedding came with an eerie quietness. In hindsight, perhaps it was foreshadowing. My hotel room, a modest accommodation booked separately from where the rest of the guests were staying, felt isolating. Dressing in the gray suit she had chosen for me months prior, I couldn't help but recall the mornings when I'd braid her hair before school, a clumsy effort met with her bubbling giggles. When I finally arrived at the venue, things felt off. The staff seemed confused by my presence, as if I were an uninvited guest trying to slip in unnoticed. Eventually directed to where the guests gathered, I caught sight of her through glass doors, a vision in white, surrounded by bridesmaids and laughter. In that fleeting moment, my heart swelled with pride. She looked radiant, the embodiment of happiness, causing all the earlier slights to briefly melt away. But it didn't last. She saw me, walked over delicately, and delivered those fateful words, "Dad, you can't stay." The reasoning was like a knife twisting. Daniel's family thought my presence would disrupt their carefully curated image. Watching her turn and nod toward security set everything into motion so swiftly that it rendered me powerless to respond. And just like that, what should have been a milestone memory dissolved into a painfully hollow goodbye. They didn't manhandle me or drag me out, but they made sure I became a spectacle. They walked me through the same doors I had entered earlier, with a silence so piercing it felt deafening. As I passed, Daniel's father met my eyes with a smug grin, while his mother barely glanced up from her champagne glass. I wanted to scream, cry, demand explanations, ask her how, after all these years, I'd become an embarrassment she couldn't bear to stand beside. But I didn't do any of that. I just walked. I kept walking until I reached the parking lot, got into my car, shut the door, and stared at the steering wheel as the reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. In that moment, something painful settled in my mind. My daughter wasn't taken from me. She left. She chose this. She chose appearances over history, his family over mine. And the worst part was, I didn't even yell or fight back because deep down, some part of me had known this moment would come. Maybe not like this, not on this day exactly, but the signs had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to see them. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, doing nothing. No engine, no phone. Just staring at the crumpled wedding invitation on the passenger seat, mocking me with its fragile formality. My hands rested on the steering wheel, while my mind wandered through fragments of years and memories that led me there. I thought about when she first called me Daddy, about how she used to run into my arms after school. I remembered scraped knees I kissed better, late-night math homework sessions where getting close enough felt like an achievement. There were the nights I ironed her school uniforms after grueling shifts, only to collapse onto the couch still dressed for work, all for a little girl who, 2 decades later, could look me in the eyes on her wedding day and tell me I didn't belong. Eventually, I drove away, not toward home, but somewhere unplanned. I needed air to ease the suffocating ache in my chest. The back road swallowed my car while I silenced the radio. My thoughts were noisy enough on their own. It wasn't just the public humiliation that cut deep, it was her coldness. Like I was some distant relative she barely tolerated rather than the man who raised her. Worse still was how it wasn't even fully her disdain. She simply borrowed it from Daniel's family, using their judgment as an excuse because she didn't have the courage to own it herself. I replayed it all in my head. Had she thought me insignificant for years and never said anything? Did she assume love meant unconditional acceptance of disrespect? Or maybe I was already fading, useful for bills but irrelevant when it came to her perfect image. Back at the hotel room, I finally shed the suit and hung it neatly in the closet. Not because I intended to wear it again, but because crumpling it felt wrong. That suit was more than fabric. It represented my commitment to stand by her side, even in moments when her slights felt heavier than gratitude. Staring at myself in the mirror, half undressed and hollow, I mumbled to no one, "What just happened?" My reflection mirrored mourning in every sense of the word. She wasn't lost to death. Yet her absence felt final all the same. A small erosion over years culminating in a landslide that buried me before I ever saw it coming. My phone showed missed calls. Eric and Glenn had reached out, probably already hearing whispers from wedding guests who would turn this into tonight's gossip before cake was cut. But I ignored them. What could I say? That I was escorted out of my own daughter's wedding as if crashing a party? That she chose everyone else over me? No, talking about it would only anchor my shame deeper. Instead, I needed space to sort through if what hurt more were her cutting words or my inability to contest them. That night brought no real sleep. Every time my eyes shut, guilt-filled images of her face snapped them open again. Her voice trembled not with sorrow but with restrained guilt, like she knew what damage she'd caused but did it anyway. That deliberate choice was what burned most, not her rejection but its careful calculation. Did she sleep peacefully afterward? Did she even miss me? Was there an empty chair left for me? Or had they filled my absence before I cleared the parking lot? The morning brought no clarity, just more questions to sit with as life carried on without answers. Edge of the bed for a moment, the weight of everything sinking into my chest. The floor beneath me seemed as lifeless as I felt inside. The sunlight pushing through the blinds felt intrusive, far too bright, as if mocking the darkness swirling in my mind. The world kept moving, oblivious to the collapse of mine. Slowly, mechanically, I got up, turned on the coffee pot, and poured myself a cup. My phone sat beside me, expectant yet silent. I stared at it, waiting for something, anything, a text, a call, even a weak apology. But all I got was emptiness. That was when clarity hit me. She felt no remorse, not a trace of it. Maybe not enough to matter, or maybe none at all. Something inside me shifted then, hardening into resolve. This wasn't just pain. It was an ending. I had spent 2 decades trying to be her foundation, steady, unwavering, but in the most defining moment of her life, she treated me as if I didn't matter at all. And though the hurt ran deep, I could see clearly what I needed to do. I grabbed my phone and made a decision I didn't allow room to question. I called the travel agency handling the honeymoon reservations I'd painstakingly gifted her, a luxury escape to Bora Bora that had previously served as a symbol of my love and sacrifice. Quiet moments of self-denial had funded it, little comforts given up so she could have something grand. When the agent answered, I gave them my reservation number with precision and instructed them to cancel the trip. No refund necessary, I said. Let the cost burn. That loss would remind me I had done far more than enough. The agent hesitated, asked if I was certain. Yes, I replied, my voice steadier than expected. They don't need my charity. They have each other now. Ending the call brought with it an odd sense of relief. like reclaiming one shard of dignity in a sea littered with betrayals. Still gripping my phone, I made one more call. This one wasn't emotional, it carried determination instead. My lawyer answered quickly and listened as I walked him through my request to update my will immediately. For years, my daughter had been written as my sole heir, a gesture born from pure parental love and pride. But now that love felt hollow. If being her father didn't entitle me to a place in her life's milestones, why should she feel entitled to inherit my legacy? My lawyer didn't pry. He understood enough and promised to set up a meeting. This choice wasn't fueled by anger. It was molded by resolve and clarity. While my love had always been unconditional, her respect clearly came with conditions, ones I never agreed to. Hours later, as noon approached, my phone finally buzzed with life. Her name flashed on the screen, Kara, still tucked under an unchanged label from years ago that now felt out of place. Staring at the call notification for a fleeting moment brought old instincts to the surface. The softer, fatherly version of me wanted to believe this might be her moment of regret. An apology, perhaps, Dad, I'm so sorry. But even that hope felt tainted and dull now. I answered without speaking first, letting her snatch control of the silence. Instead of an apology, her scream erupted into the line faster than expected. You canceled our honeymoon? How could you? Her fury overflowed without pause. It was hurt parading as entitlement, but there was no greeting, no pretense of care. You did that? Are you serious? Her words skipped reason altogether. I took a deep breath, the kind that years of restraint teaches you, and steadied myself to reply calmly. Yes, I did, I said evenly, knowing those simple words carried their own calculated weight. On her end was sharp silence, a venomous stillness before her bitterness tore through again. You're unbelievable. You're acting like a child. You humiliated me. That last accusation struck oddly. She felt humiliated by me, but spared no thought for what her actions had done to me. All at once, a bitter laugh clawed its way out of my throat. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was hollow and tired. You're angry? My voice broke through the rising tension now with deliberate sharpness. You threw me out of your wedding, Kara. You made it very clear I didn't belong there. And now you're upset because I refused to fund your getaway? I let the silence stretch again, giving space for those words to settle. But this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was closure. You made your choice. And so did I. Her voice faltered then, trying weakly to replace fury with pity. It wasn't like that. I didn't want to. But Daniel's parents. That name hung heavy between us now. Daniel's parents, the ever-present force behind her choices, ones she'd clearly aligned, paused, letting the weight of my words hang there. I could hear his breathing on the other end, unsteady and strained, like he was grasping for a response. But there was nothing left to say. I was done explaining myself to people who only heard what they wanted. This wasn't about a grudge or vengeance. It was about respect, or rather the lack of it. The years of being dismissed, disregarded, and finally discarded. I didn't need their approval anymore. Didn't need to justify drawing a line after 2 decades of bending and breaking for everyone but myself. Daniel's voice returned. Quieter this time, but still charged with irritation. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Dad. Isn't it exhausting carrying all that anger around? A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Anger? No, Daniel. What's exhausting is pretending everything's fine when it's not. What's exhausting is being treated like an afterthought and biting my tongue because it's easier than starting a fight. But not anymore. He was silent again, and for a fleeting moment I thought the conversation might be over. Maybe he'd finally understand that this wasn't just a fit of rage or bitterness. This was self-preservation. Then he spoke, his tone sharp and unforgiving. So that's it? You're going to punish all of us because you can't get over yourself? I closed my eyes, leaning against the porch railing and feeling the cool evening air settle over me. I wasn't going to let him provoke me into another argument where nothing got resolved. I'm not punishing anyone, I said evenly. I'm just done being punished for existing. Before he could respond, I ended the call and blocked the number, the finality of it hitting me harder than I expected. My hands were steady again now, and as I looked out at the yard, at the expanse of overgrown grass waiting to be tamed, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet kind of resolve. For years, I'd convinced myself that love meant sacrifice, that being there for others meant putting myself last. But But standing there in the fading light, I realized that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. The world didn't crumble because I said no, because I set boundaries. The calls would stop eventually. The texts would fade into memory. And in time, they'd either accept my decision or they wouldn't. That wasn't something I could control, and it wasn't something I needed to anymore. As the mower roared back to life and I started cutting away the chaos in my yard, a small sense of peace crept in, quiet but undeniable. It wasn't joy or even contentment, just clarity. And for now, that was enough. It had probably already happened. There was a pause on the other end, a brief one, but it landed where it needed to. Then, I heard the voice I hadn't since she'd so carelessly discarded me, as if I were insignificant. Kara, she must have taken the phone mid-conversation. Dad, she said, her voice uneven, desperate. Please! I didn't know he canceled everything. I thought the flights were still confirmed. I didn't think... You'd actually... I cut her off, unwilling to hear another excuse. You didn't think I'd follow through, I said. That I'd roll over like always. That I'd forgive you before you even apologized. Well, guess what? I'm done. The silence between us was heavier than it had ever been. Then she cracked. You're blowing this out of proportion, she screamed, and I could picture her standing in a crowded terminal, face flushed, trying not to draw attention yet failing miserably. I was under pressure, she continued weakly. I had to keep things calm at the wedding. It wasn't personal. That attempt at justification snapped something inside me. You had me thrown out by security, I growled. That's not pressure, that's betrayal. And it was personal. Don't you dare try to rewrite it now. I could hear her crying at that point. Maybe it was from shame or rage or some tangled mix of both. It didn't matter to me. It still doesn't. I'm not fixing this, I said slowly with purpose. You fix it, or don't. But don't ever call me again expecting anything. For the second time in my life, I hung up on my daughter. By the time I sank down onto the porch steps, my legs had turned to lead and my pulse drummed relentlessly in my ears. But I wasn't trembling with regret. I was charged with a sharp, undeniable clarity. For years, I had wondered if I was too harsh, too stubborn, too set in my ways. I had second-guessed every moment of so-called tough love I'd given her. Now, though everything sharpened into focus, I had been her safety net, a fallback plan, the ever-reliable fool who appeared no matter how cruelly she treated me. She hadn't cried when she kicked me out of her wedding. She cried because the perks of having me around had finally disappeared. I sat outside for an hour after that call, watching the clouds gather and the sky darken into a deep gray haze as the heavy scent of rain filled the air. Somewhere in that quiet hum of impending weather, something shifted inside me. Not peace exactly, but a kind of knowing, a recognition that deepened every breath I took. It was the understanding that this time I'd done the right thing, even if it carved out more pain than relief. That call didn't reopen any wounds. It confirmed they'd never properly healed because I hadn't let them. I had allowed her to trample over me repeatedly, believing that's what good fathers did, that they gave and forgave endlessly. But good fathers don't sacrifice their dignity for a place at a table where they're clearly unwanted. She never called back that day. No text followed. Just silence. A silence that felt like punishment and liberation at once. I imagined them stuck at the terminal, frantically scrambling for flights they couldn't afford, arguing in low tones over who was at fault. Perhaps she cried in some cramped airport bathroom while he muttered curses aimed at me, but too bitter to say aloud. Or maybe they just sat apart in separate corners of the gate area, quietly stewing in a reality they never thought would touch them. That sometimes, people walk away, even the ones who raised you. The silence didn't last long, though not because of her. It was broken by everyone else. By the week's end, my phone became an endless buzzing loop of incoming messages and voicemails from well-meaning relatives convinced they could mend what had shattered between us. First came Cheryl, my sister and perennial mother figure to Kara since my wife passed away years ago. She called 3 times in one day and left a voicemail laced with audible restraint. John, please. I know she hurt you, but she's your daughter. One mistake shouldn't define everything. I played that voicemail on speaker while scrubbing dishes afterward, her words just evaporating into steam, along with the suds and running water. Cheryl hadn't been there that day. She hadn't seen the cold certainty in Kara's face when she told me to leave without hesitation or remorse. It wasn't just one mistake, it was finality manifesting itself. In no uncertain terms. Then came the group text, a thread crowded with relatives Kara barely kept in touch with after high. Everything you could. You gave your all, and it's okay to let go. The world, with all its clattering opinions and judgments, had faded enough for me to find clarity. I didn't need to force a resolution or chase an apology that might never come. The ache of what happened was still there, but it no longer consumed me. It had become part of me, a scar, not an open wound. I started to rediscover myself in the quiet moments. Mornings on the porch with my coffee, evenings flipping through old photo albums, not to wallow in the past, but to remember the good, the real. The love was there. It always had been, even if it had become distorted along the way. Kara would always be my daughter. That fact didn't change with her choices or mistakes, or mine. But love didn't mean abandoning my own peace. Love didn't mean losing pieces of myself to keep someone else afloat. And so I stayed grounded, steady, and unwavering, not out of bitterness, but out of respect. Respect for myself and perhaps for her too, in a way that only time might make clear. Closure wasn't a door slamming shut. For me, it was learning to live with the door slightly ajar, letting whatever breeze passed through carry no weight, no power over me anymore. Just a gentle reminder of lessons learned and love redefined. Weeks had passed since I let go. Kara hadn't reached out, not after the letter, not after the voicemail she'd left, one I never listened to. Her name lit up on my phone screen just once more, but I let it ring until it stopped. There was no satisfaction in ignoring her, no sense of vengeance or pride, but I'd made my decision. This wasn't anger or revenge. It was self-preservation. My love for her hadn't faded, but the part of me willing to be discarded was gone. You don't get to push someone out of your life in public, only to seek comfort from them in private. Convenience can't replace connection without consequences. I threw myself into routine, work, responsibilities, anything to build a rhythm again. Every morning started the same. A fresh cup of coffee and a seat by the window with the newspaper in hand, circling job ads and opportunities, not for anyone in particular. In spite of everything, she was never far from my thoughts, because as any father knows, you can't just stop caring. I wondered whether she regretted it, whether her honeymoon, once rebooked, was filled with joy or awkward silences. Did Daniel look at her differently now, knowing how easily she shut her father out? Had she rewritten the story in her head already, casting me as the villain unwilling to accept change? Some people do that, alter reality until it aligns with their narrative. One afternoon at the grocery store, an old friend and former babysitter of Kara's, Sandra, spotted me near the freezer aisle. She didn't know the whole story, just snippets here and there. We exchanged brief conversation, eventually landing on Kara. When she cautiously asked how my daughter was doing, I answered flatly, still honeymooning. It wasn't true, but I didn't feel like elaborating further. Sandra waited for more information, but I left it at that. Conversations like these had become routine. Clipped words, half-truths, enough to keep things moving, but without exposing the parts that mattered. The full story belonged to me, and I wasn't interested in sharing it with anyone who'd only seen the surface. Not everyone respected those boundaries. My younger brother Leo showed up unannounced one day, like it was decades ago when we'd hang out in the basement as kids. I hadn't seen him since before Kara's wedding, but his visit carried clear intentions. Sitting across from me in my living room after a few minutes of small talk, he leaned forward and asked directly whether I planned to stay angry forever. Angry. The word hit me in a way that felt off, because this wasn't anger. Pain isn't measurable like heat. You don't just cool off with time. I told him plainly that I wasn't mad. I was done. There's a difference between the two. Leo hesitated, still unsure. He called Kara's actions a mistake, a bad one, but seemed convinced cutting ties entirely was too much. I looked away, my eyes settling on the grooves of an old coffee table we'd built years ago. Everything I had, even after she made it clear where her priorities lay, I gave willingly until there was nothing left to offer. Leo didn't argue further. He stood after a moment, paused at the door, then said softly, he just hoped I wouldn't still be standing there when she realized what she'd lost. I didn't respond. Watching him leave was enough. As his truck disappeared down the road, relief mingled strangely with sadness, though I understood his concern. Still, he was wrong about one thing. I wasn't standing there anymore. I'd walked away. Kara might reach out someday, maybe months from now or years later, whether drenched in tears or cloaked in silence. But waiting wasn't part of me anymore. That gift of patience and forgiveness had been buried alongside my unworn wedding suit long ago. On what would have been her wedding anniversary, I went for a drive, no destination in mind, just winding hills and open roads stretching beneath an orange-purple sky. Eventually, I pulled over to take in the quiet scene around me, the wind stirring through whispering trees, and thought about the version of myself who would have gone to any lengths for his daughter. I didn't resent him. If anything, I admired him deeply for loving without restraint or conditions, for giving everything he could, even if he deserved better than what he got in return. And though loving deeply is its own kind of strength, sometimes stepping away is even harder and more necessary. If you've ever walked away from someone you care deeply about just to protect your own peace, you probably know how hard that strength can be to muster and how heavy it stays with you afterward. When do you finally say, enough is enough? Share your story below if this struck a chord with your own journey.